All right, so here's a little quiz for kids that I've been working on. The idea is that the kids can pick for any question out of these 9, 1 out of 3 answers, and as soon as they pick the right answer, they get to move on to the next question. It gives them a little text that explains to them why that's the right answer and some background. And as soon as they finish question 9, they get to click finish the quiz. And then an email just goes out to the owner of the quiz that literally just says, hey, somebody did the quiz. So it's very, very rudimentary tracking. And what happens for the kids is once they finish the quiz, they get a little PDF, which is just a certificate. Hey, you did the quiz. You're a big boy. You're a big girl. And they can print that and put that above their bed, and everybody's happy and everything's hunky-dory. So how can we build this? Spoiler alert, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to, it's not going to be possible to build this with a query loop, at least not with the current version of Bricksforge Pro Forms, but we can do it on foot, and both of these subjects are going to be covered in the video that you're about to watch. Let's jump right in. All right, guys, so first here's the sad news. I spent about 1.5 hours, you can still see it here, creating a CPT and using a query loop to bring the questions and answers into the Pro Forms. And unfortunately, it turns out that this only works to some extent because there's a bug in Pro Forms that I'm reporting right now, whereby steps won't work inside query loops. So let's go into the details of what I did. I first created a custom post type. Custom post type is just quiz questions, okay? And it's fairly straightforward. It just has a title and it has it is not queryable, so it won't get its own URLs. Hang on a second, right? It's not publicly queryable. And yeah, I picked this nice icon for it. So I went in here and these are the questions, 9 questions. In every one of these questions, there's a bunch of fields here. So the first field is a field that just says the number of the question. This is question number 9. And then there's 8 others. And then there's 3 answers for each question. I could have used a repeater here, but since it's really always 3 answers, and that's immutable, it's not going to change, we know that, then there's no need for a repeater. I put this field in, which we just put a string into that field, like 1 word or 2 words that are unique to the correct answer. And we're using this to poll in the loop which question is the correct one. And then for the correct answer, there's an explainer. The whole point of this thing is that we're building a little cute website for a park. And inside that park, people can stroll around and then they can reach different steps in that park where there's a sign, and on each sign is a QR code. And if you use the QR code, you get to that mini website. And on the mini website, you do this quiz where you answer 3 questions about each step of the journey through the park. You just pick the question and then it says, good job. And then it allows you to move on. And that part where the next step appears, that's not possible with loops. So just for the context, let's go back here. We have the 9 questions. You just saw how I built the questions. And then if we go into Pro Forms, we can see how I did that here. We have a block. On the block is the loop. So we're just looping through the questions. And we have the step, which doesn't work. We have the title, which is just the post title. Then we have a radio thingamabob with the 3 answers. This is called quiz ACF question number _ answers. So that's the ID of this field. So it's quiz 01 answers, quiz 02 answers, quiz 03 answers, and so on. And then each answer is just pulled in with dynamic data. Label and value both pull in this dynamic data. Then we have a conditional field here. And the condition is just if the form field question number answers, so quiz 01 answers contains the word from the correct field, this shit appears with the explainer and then the next step button. So this all works really nice on the front end. We have all the questions here, and then if I pick the wrong one, it does nothing. But as soon as I pick the right one, yes, wonderful. You know, here's your explainer. And then if I click next button, next question, that's the part that doesn't work. As soon as I put the step outside of here, you can see that even it's being displayed here, right? But unfortunately, that's the bug. So now we're gonna build this quiz without the query loop, unfortunately, but hey, let's take a look at that and build a quiz together. Are you ready? First of all, we need to put in a Pro Forms element. Thank you. Pro Forms, the first thing I always do is I disable this bottom padding, and instead I set the whole element to flex, and I give it a gap. Space S is fine. Now we need an H3. We need a radio wrapper, 3 answers. And then we need a conditional wrapper. Inside the conditional wrapper, we put the explainer and the next step. At the top, we put a step, and it turns out we don't need a text field. This is what we have. Now, all of this needs to be wrapped in a div wrap block because that's our question. So we have question. Every question has its own step. Every question has a heading, which is an H3, which is just the question itself. Then these are the answers. This conditional wrapper, I'm going to call it move on. This appears when you have selected the right answer. Going to have the explainer, which just says, hey, you picked the right answer, and this is why it's the right answer. Right, it's a conditional wrapper, so display is going to be flex. It's going to be stacked, and it's going to have a gap of space S. We can start populating this one question with actual content. So we have just one ready. For the answers, we don't need a label. I'm going to populate the answers. And here's our explainer. Now we need to give all these fields their IDs. So it's going to be question answers. That's actually it. Condition is going to be form field. Field is going to be question answers. Contains, and in this case it needs to contain this word. And if that's the case, here for next step we say nächste Frage, next question, then it should move on to the next step. So we can see this works. Now right click on the question, class converter. So we're going to give classes to all of these. That looks good. We want the ID styles to be put on the classes and erase them from the ID level, create classes. So here's our question. Now we're going to have 9 questions, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I'm going to populate them all with content. All right, so here they all are in the right order. Now, the magic trick, let's see if it works or if it explodes in my face. Multi-step needs to be enabled. So we're going to have a step navigation. Yeah, we might as well animate the steps. We can jump to top. Yeah, why not? Autofocus first field and show summary. Yeah. So technically now it should take us from one step to the next. Let's find out. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. All right. So something's wrong here and I'm going to look up why and what. All right, so here's the solution. Not only can the steps not be inside a loop, the problem is that they can't be inside anywhere else except at the root of Pro Forms. So as soon as the step is inside the question, we've got a problem. That doesn't work. So the steps need to be at the root, right? Now if we do this, then here we can see that the steps are all here, right? As soon as I click the correct answer, I can move on to the next question, and that's how it works. All right, so now there's 2 more things to fix with each question. I still haven't fixed the conditional logic here. I need to do that, and then obviously the steps need to get their own names. So let's do that. So in each step under general, I can just give it a name. And one more quick correction. The steps shouldn't be in front of the questions, but they should be after the question. So you have the first question doesn't have its own step above it, and then what follows is the next step. So this one is question 2 and there's no question 1. But if you go on Pro Forms itself and you go to multi-step, you enable that and step settings, you can see that the first step is called question 1. And then you can give it some typography like the current step is bolded in my case. I also enabled allow clicks on steps so that I'm able to navigate to each question I want by just clicking on it. In multi-step, we can select a different type of animation, for instance fade bottom, and we can also make it shorter. There, that's faster. Now here's one more interesting thing. What if we actually did want to set up a score at the end? We want to see how many questions out of 9 were answered correctly. How would we do that? We go to any question, go to the answers, and for this one, for instance, the second one is the right answer, and we give that a calculation value of 1. And we do that with all the answers. At this point, we also need to give the answers radio check wrappers their own unique IDs. So question 01 answers, question 02 answers, and so on, because we are going to add them up with a calculation field. Now let's just add a block at the bottom here, and we're going to call this total. And inside that block, we're going to put a calculation field, and we're going to put a text, just a basic text field. So the calculation field is just going to add up all the answers that are correct. There we go. And now we're going to call that field question total. And then we're going to use the live value feature that Pro Forms offers. We're going to say question total out of 9 questions are Correct. Isn't this a bit annoying? Isn't this in the way? Yes, sure it is. So we can just click this only remote switch here, and then the field won't be displayed. It's going to do the calculation for us, but it's not going to be there. Now in this block, we're going to set the row gap to 0. And now, so that we've given all the question fields their own unique IDs, we also need to set them up in the conditional fields. Question 09 answers, question 08 answers. We need to pull them, right? Makes sense. Now let's answer a few questions correctly. This question, we answer this correctly. We're going to answer this correctly, and we're going to answer number 6 correctly. And then at number 9, it says 0 out of 9 questions are correct. Well, that's wonderful. Isn't that great? What the fuck happened now? Turns out that in here, in the formula field, you can only use one squiggly bracket around the field IDs, not like in some other fields where you're supposed to use 2 squiggly brackets. So keep an eye out for that. I mean, it does say that up here, so, you know. So we have 1 correct question, 2, 3, bingo. See, there we go. That's how that works. Now, one last thing. Before I started counting the answers, why did I just use the same custom ID here, question_answers, on all these answer things here? Doesn't that mean that if you select one answer in the first question and then you select another answer in the second question, then doesn't that just unselect the first one? Yes, it does. And in our special case, it really doesn't matter, because there's no email that needs to be sent in where the results need to be shown to anybody. So since there's not going to be any record, there's not going to be any need to have a special ID for each one of those fields. Only when we try to do something with it does it become absolutely necessary. Strictly speaking though, what I did at the beginning of this video was absolutely against best practices. If you want to be really careful and diligent about this, then every field needs to have its own ID. That's why it's called an ID. Now, here's one more question I have for you guys. Have you been screaming at your screen? And if so, why? If the answer is yes, and because I took this element with this question_step class out of its BEM context, then golly gosh gee, you are right. Obviously, we're going to need to rename this class, and we're just going to call it quiz step. Well, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching. We have a quiz here that works, and that even tells us at the end how many of these questions are correct, even though my boss didn't even want that. I'll talk to you soon.